It was supposed to be a celebration. On a crisp Sunday morning in May, the residents of Woodlake Ridge, an upscale suburb just outside of Charlotte, North Carolina, gathered at the sprawling estate of the Aldens. The occasion, Emily Alden's 32nd birthday. The lawn was immaculate, the tulips in full bloom, and the sun cast a golden glow over the rows of vintage cars parked neatly along the curved driveway. To the neighbors and invited guests, the Aldens were the picture of Southern success. Jacob Alden, 38, was a high-flying corporate consultant whose firm had just opened its fifth branch across the East Coast. Emily, formerly a high school literature teacher, now devoted her time to charitable work and managing their estate's social calendar. They were expecting their first child, a long-awaited miracle pregnancy that had endeared them even more to the community. But behind the well-manicured hedges and $4,000 bottles of French champagne, something far darker was fermenting. Emily, radiant in a flowing pale blue dress that hugged her pregnant belly, moved from guest to guest with practiced charm. Her laughter was soft, but you could see the fatigue behind her eyes. Her doctor had advised her to rest more, but Emily had insisted on hosting this event. One last big hurrah before motherhood, she'd said to her assistant, Megan. I want people to see we're happy. They were not. Jacob hadn't slept in their bedroom in 2 weeks. He claimed it was because Emily snored too loudly now that she was pregnant, something Emily found hurtful, but understandable. She blamed the hormones. What she didn't know was that Jacob had been spending his nights in a downtown condo, one he kept secret, one he shared with a woman named Veronica Hale. Veronica was everything Emily wasn't: younger, bolder, unpredictable. She met Jacob at a corporate mixer hosted by a mutual client. The affair, at first a series of flirtatious emails and business lunches, had escalated into something far more physical within a month. Jacob had told himself it was temporary. Just an outlet. But Veronica had other plans. And she had just arrived at the party. Wearing a white sleeveless sheath dress, bold, almost defiant, given the occasion, Veronica introduced herself as a friend of the Perrys, clients of Jacob's. No one blinked. In circles like these, plus ones are rarely questioned. She moved through the crowd with ease, her long dark hair cascading over her shoulder like a runway model in slow motion. Emily first noticed her while sipping mocktail sangria near the back patio. She's beautiful, she said to Megan, who was rechecking the dessert arrangements. Who? Megan asked, following her gaze. That woman in the white. She looks familiar. Megan squinted. Not sure. I think she came in with the Perrys. Or maybe Jacob knows her? Emily said nothing. As the brunch progressed, conversations turned from small talk to real estate gossip and politics. A jazz trio played softly by the fountain. The chef passed around avocado crostinis and duck confit canapes. Everything was flawless until Emily took her third sip of her herbal tea. She blinked slowly. Something felt off. The taste was sharper than usual. Almost metallic. But she shook it off. Pregnancy made everything taste different. And besides, she'd been drinking that same brand, Lavender Calm from Leavenleaf Organics, for weeks now. Minutes passed. Then a wave of nausea hit her. At first, she thought it was the heat. North Carolina springs can be unpredictable, and the layered dress didn't help. She steadied herself against the porch railing, forcing a smile as a guest complimented her hair. Then came the cramping. It started mild, like a muscle tightening under her ribs, but quickly escalated into something sharper. Deeper. Her hand flew to her belly. Jacob, across the yard laughing at some joke from a business partner, noticed his wife's change in posture. For a moment, he considered walking over, but Veronica caught his eye and subtly shook her head. Emily sat down. Or rather, collapsed into a wrought iron chair. Megan was by her side in seconds. Something's wrong, Emily whispered. The rest happened quickly. Guests gathering. Someone shouting for a doctor. Jacob finally rushing over. Emily barely conscious. Megan dialing 911. The last thing Emily remembered was the smell of gardenia and lemon polish from the napkin someone pressed to her forehead. The teacup, still half full, was later found tipped on the railing. The police would preserve it as evidence. At Atrium Medical Center, Emily was stabilized. Dr. Joan Kim, the OBGYN on call, immediately recognized symptoms of potential poisoning. Blood pressure erratic. Nausea. Vomiting. Disorientation. Internal fetal distress. By evening, Emily was unconscious and in intensive care. The baby's heart rate was slowing. Jacob was silent in the waiting room, face buried in his hands. He looked devastated, but guilt, not just grief, contorted his features. He knew. Some part of him, the part he tried to ignore, suspected who might be behind it. Veronica. She hadn't shown up at the hospital. She hadn't even sent a message. And the timing, it was too perfect. He pulled out his phone and reread her last text from the previous night. "You'll thank me someday. One way or another, this ends tomorrow." It was supposed to be cryptic. Playful, even. Now, it felt like a threat. He deleted it, almost instinctively. The police arrived 2 hours later. Detective Rachel Monroe was assigned to the case. A straight shooter with a decade in homicide and a reputation for sniffing out the lies hidden beneath polite smiles and high society etiquette. She asked Jacob for a list of anyone with access to the tea or food at the event. She asked about staff, guests, caterers. Jacob recited names, omitting only one, Veronica. It wasn't until Detective Monroe asked Megan, separately, if she noticed anything unusual that a crack began to form. "I saw this woman, a guest, near the kitchen before the tea was served," Megan said. "She was alone for a few minutes. Wearing white. Looked like she didn't belong." The detective made a note. Back at the estate, crime scene techs were already collecting the tea leaves, the canister, the cup. And in a penthouse across town, Veronica Hale stood before her bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection. Her hand shook as she washed a small silver funnel and tucked a Ziploc bag deep into the laundry basket. She thought no one had seen her. But she was wrong. And the investigation had just begun. For most residents of the quiet town of Millstone, Connecticut, Evelyn Marlowe was little more than a name whispered at fundraisers, a striking face glimpsed in the society pages. But for those who truly knew her, though few could claim that, they would tell you that Evelyn didn't just enter a room, she rearranged it. And on the day she walked into the Lansbury Foundation charity brunch, she brought with her a storm no one saw coming. It had started months before that fateful day, long before anyone ever suspected foul play. Evelyn, a 35-year-old art consultant with a curated accent and a backstory nobody could quite verify, had met Charles Whitmore, a wealthy real estate mogul and soon-to-be father, at a gallery opening in Manhattan. While others gawked at the abstract oil canvases and sipped on overpriced Prosecco, Charles had noticed her across the room, calm and composed in a tailored black jumpsuit, her gaze fixed not on the art, but on the people. They spoke for less than 15 minutes that evening. But that was all Evelyn needed. She didn't chase him. She didn't flirt. She simply offered a cryptic comment about one of the pieces, something about dissonance and decay, and then disappeared into the crowd. 2 weeks later, they met again, this time by accident at a private auction Charles frequented. From there, the meetings became more regular, then secret, then intimate. Charles was married to Lena Whitmore, a former high school English teacher known for her soft voice, clean laughter, and grounded kindness. She was 6 months pregnant at the time with their first child, a daughter. The Whitmores were a local fairy tale, the picture of wealth meets humility. But Evelyn saw none of that. She saw only a man who seemed bored with his life, starved for excitement, ripe for persuasion. And Evelyn? She specialized in persuasion. There's a particular type of envy that grows in silence. Evelyn had never been poor, but she had never been chosen. And Charles, with his tailored suits and trophy wife and picture-perfect lawn, represented everything that had eluded her. So when she saw Lena's growing belly in a society magazine profile, the rage that bloomed in Evelyn wasn't just about love. It was about erasure. She told herself she didn't want him, not really. What she wanted was what he represented. And if she couldn't have it, neither could Lena. But poison isn't always a vial and a motive. Sometimes it starts as a whisper. Evelyn began visiting Millstone more frequently, using Charles's connections to advise on the town's new cultural center. Soon, she was a fixture, albeit a discreet one. She rented a small guest suite in a downtown boutique inn. She appeared on planning committees. She even charmed Lena once or twice, small compliments at charity events, a joke about motherhood, a knowing smile across a table. Meanwhile, Charles was unraveling. He had never planned to fall so deeply. The affair, in his mind, was temporary, just a distraction. But Evelyn had a way of making him feel essential. And that became addictive. Lena noticed. Not the affair, not yet. But she felt the shift. A coolness. Missed dinners. Lingering cologne that wasn't his usual brand. Still, she made excuses. Pregnancy was making her emotional. Charles was stressed with work. And besides, every couple hit rough patches. At night, she'd sit on the nursery rug folding baby clothes and talking to her daughter through the skin of her belly, telling her how wonderful her daddy was, how much they both loved her. While Lena talked to her unborn child, Charles was in Evelyn's suite. And Evelyn? Evelyn was making plans. According to later testimony, it began with research. She read pregnancy forums, medical articles, even old case studies. She needed something subtle. Something that would cause illness, fatigue, pain, nausea, but wouldn't kill immediately. She wanted Lena to suffer, to fall apart slowly, so that when Charles finally left her, no one would blame him. She even toyed with the idea of anonymously tipping off the media about Lena's delicate condition to stir rumors of instability. But Evelyn wasn't patient. She reached out to a contact in Brooklyn, an old college flame who worked in experimental agriculture and owed her a favor. He delivered a small, unmarked bottle of liquid. It had no taste. No odor. He told her to use it carefully. Evelyn nodded but said nothing. The final piece of her plan came unexpectedly. Her name was Cora Linwood, Lena's personal assistant and former student. Cora adored Lena. But she was also broke, nursing a college debt and living in her sister's basement. Evelyn saw the cracks immediately. She didn't approach her with cash. That would be obvious. Instead, she asked for sketches. Cora drew in her spare time, and Evelyn, claiming to have gallery connections, offered to help her get exposure. In return, she asked for small favors. What tea did Lena drink? What time did she usually nap? Where was the kitchen pantry? Cora thought it was harmless. Harmless, until the day Evelyn asked her to switch the tea canisters before the Sunday brunch. She did it. And she didn't ask why. In the weeks following Vivian Clark's fainting episode at her birthday luncheon, the mansion at 482 Brighton Lane no longer felt like a home. It was a shell. The once vibrant estate, with its marble atrium, crystal chandeliers, and buzzing social calendar, had gone eerily quiet. Flowers meant for the birthday centerpieces wilted in their vases. The staff moved about with hushed voices. But the biggest change wasn't the silence. It was suspicion. Vivian remained in the hospital under constant observation. Doctors ran every test imaginable, blood panels, CT scans, fetal monitoring, but none could conclusively determine the cause of her collapse. The symptoms were erratic: nausea, abdominal pain, fatigue, and now, an alarming drop in blood pressure. Dr. Fiona Adler, Vivian's longtime OBGYN, suspected something external. This isn't just pregnancy, she had said quietly to Marcus in the hallway, avoiding the eyes of a nearby nurse. I'm not saying it's foul play, but we need to look closely at what Vivian's ingesting. That comment haunted Marcus as he returned to the house each night, alone. He began reviewing every detail in his mind. The party. The tea. The timing. Vivian had sipped chamomile tea just before collapsing. She'd always had a ritual with tea, especially during her pregnancy. But what if that ritual had been used against her? Marcus called for a full audit of the kitchen inventory, beginning with the tea. That's when Harriet Monroe, Vivian's personal assistant, started to crack. Harriet had been with the Clarks for over 3 years. Quiet, efficient, and largely invisible, she was the kind of employee you forgot was even in the room. But ever since Vivian's hospitalization, Harriet's behavior had shifted. She jumped when spoken to. She avoided eye contact. She started showing up late to the estate. Marcus noticed. One afternoon, after the household staff had gone home and Harriet was reorganizing Vivian's books in the study, Marcus approached her. "Harriet," he began gently, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." She froze mid-shelf. Did anyone at all, have access to Vivian's tea? She hesitated. "Just me, sir. And sometimes Janice from the kitchen when I was busy." "Anyone else? Any guests?" Harriet's eyes flicked away. "No. Not that I saw." But that wasn't true. Not entirely. Harriet had seen something, or someone. And deep inside, the guilt was eating her alive. Weeks earlier, during final preparations for Vivian's birthday brunch, a familiar guest had arrived early under the guise of helping with table arrangements. Juliet Monroe, the same woman Marcus had once introduced as an old friend of David Lane, though Harriet had long suspected otherwise. Juliet was poised, always overdressed, and had a peculiar way of walking into private spaces like she owned them. That morning, Harriet remembered stepping away from the butler's pantry for just a few minutes to take a call. When she returned, she had seen Juliet standing near the glass tea jars, holding something. A small vial. Translucent. The moment Harriet walked in, Juliet had slipped it back into her clutch and offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At the time, Harriet told herself it was nothing. Probably some kind of perfume or essential oil. Besides, who was she to question the company her employers kept? Now, that memory wouldn't leave her. She didn't tell Marcus that night. Not yet. Fear gripped her throat too tightly. But someone else was ready to talk. Detective Marlon Green, recently assigned to Vivian Clark's case after the hospital submitted a report for potential toxic ingestion under suspicious circumstances, began his inquiries quietly. He had seen these kinds of cases before. Affluent families. Pretty homes. Ugly secrets. He started by interviewing Dr. Adler, who provided medical data suggesting trace elements of aconitine, a rare toxin derived from monkshood, had shown up in Vivian's system. Not in lethal quantities, but enough to suggest repeated exposure. Aconitine. Undetectable by taste. Fast-acting. Rarely used outside of academic labs or, more ominously, black market herbalists. Detective Green's ears perked up. He visited the Clark residence under the pretense of asking basic questions. Marcus welcomed him in. They spoke for an hour about Vivian's health, the party, the tea. Marcus mentioned Harriet as the person most familiar with the pantry. Green requested a list of all staff and guests present at the brunch. That's when Juliet Monroe's name popped up again. Juliet had been a fixture in Marcus's orbit over the past year, always on the fringe, always just a friend. But Detective Green, who had a good nose for proximity and motive, started digging. He learned Juliet was not just a socialite. In 2016, she had filed bankruptcy under her legal name, Juliet Camden, after being sued by a previous employer for embezzlement. The case was sealed, but the paper trail remained. Juliet had since reinvented herself, new name, new connections, new lovers. Green pulled Juliet's phone records and bank statements. That's when things got darker. In the weeks leading up to the brunch, Juliet had made a $2,000 Venmo payment to a user named HolisticRx Botanica. No description. Green cross-referenced the username with an herbalist shop operating out of New Orleans, known to authorities for selling unregulated botanical compounds, including derivatives of aconite. It was circumstantial, but damning. Back at the mansion, Harriet's conscience finally broke. Late one night, she knocked on Marcus's office door, her eyes red and voice trembling. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. She recounted everything: Juliet's early arrival, the vial, the odd behavior. "I didn't know it meant anything at the time," she whispered. "But now I think she did something." Marcus sat in stunned silence. He didn't want to believe it. Not entirely. Despite everything, a part of him still clung to the memory of Juliet's smile, the thrill of their secret. But the pieces were falling into place, and denial could no longer hold them back. He picked up the phone and called Detective Green. What followed was a formal statement, a warrant, and an official investigation into Juliet Monroe. The case had begun. And in the shadows of a tea-stained pantry, the whispers of betrayal had finally started to speak. Detective Maurice Kendall didn't believe in hunches. In his nearly 2 decades with the Fort Worth Police Department, he had learned that hunches were just feelings dressed up in a badge. What solved cases were details, overlooked phone logs, receipts, stray fingerprints, and people who talked more than they should. But something about Cassandra Blake had gnawed at him from the beginning. Her answers were too perfect. Her expressions too measured. She had charm, sure, but the kind of charm that smothered tension rather than eased it. So when Harriet Langley, Lily's personal assistant, showed up at the station trembling and pale, Kendall leaned in close. "Take your time," he said gently, sliding a cup of coffee toward her. Harriet fidgeted with the sleeve of her sweater. I didn't know what I was part of. I swear I didn't." It took nearly 2 hours, but her story unfolded: Cassandra's sudden interest in her art, the thoughtful compliments, the casual questions about Lily's routine. How one day she found Cassandra near the butler's pantry fiddling with something in her handbag. At the time, it hadn't seemed significant. But now, she had this little bottle. Like a perfume sample, but it didn't smell like anything, Harriet said, staring down at her hands. "I thought it was maybe oil or something. But now—" Detective Kendall didn't flinch. He simply stood, left the room, and within the hour, a search warrant was approved. Cassandra Blake lived in a high-rise condominium overlooking the Trinity River. Her apartment was the type featured in luxury magazines: all clean lines, warm lighting, curated art, and the scent of expensive diffusers hanging in the air. When Kendall and his team arrived that Thursday morning, she didn't seem surprised. She was wearing an ivory silk robe, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, and her eyes showed no fear. "This is a misunderstanding," she said with a small, polite smile. "Of course, you're welcome to look around." Kendall nodded to the officers. They began their sweep while he stayed in the entryway with her. "You've been spending a lot of time at the Harrington estate," he noted casually. "Social visits. Fundraisers. You and Marcus Harrington, were you close?" Cassandra's lips twitched. "We were friends. Friendly. I admired his philanthropic work. Nothing more." Inside, the officers moved room to room. They collected a few prescription bottles, checked the kitchen for any unusual ingredients, took photos of her cosmetics. One officer paused in the master bathroom, inspecting a drawer filled with glass vials and wellness products. Nothing clearly suspicious. But then they opened a decorative wooden box on a shelf above her bed. Inside, wrapped in silk, was a small clear vial. No label. No scent. Detective Kendall was called over immediately. He looked at the item carefully, sealed it in an evidence bag, and took a photo. Cassandra, still by the window, arched an eyebrow when he returned. "Find what you were looking for?" "We found something. We'll let the lab decide what it is." She didn't ask what it was. She simply smiled again, as if bored. "I assume I'm still free to go about my day?" "For now," Kendall said. Back at the station, the evidence was rushed to the lab. The forensic team began testing the clear substance. Preliminary reports suggested it contained compounds consistent with scopolamine and atropine, substances that in high doses could cause confusion, nausea, and organ stress, particularly dangerous for a pregnant woman. Kendall didn't celebrate. He'd learned not to, not until the pieces locked into place. Meanwhile, Cassandra's behavior remained consistent. She posted a photo of a sunset from her balcony, liked a few charity posts online, attended a gallery showing that weekend. But Detective Kendall noticed the subtle shift: fewer appearances, fewer photos with mutual friends of Marcus and Lily, and a silence from David Maxwell, the friend who had introduced her to everyone. By Monday, they had enough for a formal interview. At the downtown precinct, Cassandra sat with her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Trina Schultz, and refused to answer most questions. "I have no knowledge of any substances," Cassandra said flatly. "Your fingerprints were on the vial. I live alone. I touch everything in my apartment. Harriet Langley identified you at the scene. Said she saw you with a vial similar to this one. I admire Harriet, but she's under stress. Her memory might not be reliable." Kendall leaned forward. "You had motive, Cassandra. You were having an affair with Marcus Harrington. His wife was pregnant. Your presence at the party, your proximity to the butler's pantry, the poison found in the tea, it all fits." Her face remained still. "Conjecture. Then why didn't you tell us you were in the kitchen that day?" "I wasn't asked." It was a battle of patience. Cassandra played her cards like a professional poker player: no tells, no panic. But Kendall had something she didn't: momentum. Later that evening, a security team combed through deleted files on Cassandra's phone. Among the recovered items was a text to a contact listed only as R. The message read, "Need another bottle. Same as before. Stronger this time." That was the tipping point. The number was traced to a burner phone purchase near a strip mall outside Dallas. The man who sold it was connected to a now-defunct holistic supplement business, one flagged previously for unauthorized chemical substances. When Kendall saw the final toxicology report, his jaw clenched. The compound in Lily's bloodstream matched the contents of Cassandra's vial. He finally had her. An arrest warrant was issued within hours. But Cassandra wasn't at her apartment. She had left a note. "I was never meant to stay in the shadows. But you should know, Marcus was never innocent either." It was signed with a lipstick print. The hunt for Cassandra Blake was on. The air inside courtroom 6A of the Rockbridge County Courthouse was dense with silence, not tension, not noise, just a heavy kind of quiet that settled deep into the floorboards. It was the kind of silence that wrapped itself around everyone, from the judge to the janitor, from the press seated in the back to the defendant sitting at the table in black. It was October now. Nearly 4 months had passed since Lily Atwood had collapsed at her birthday party, a cup of poisoned chamomile tea slipping from her hand and shattering on the marble tiles of the Atwood estate. Since then, a grand jury had handed down an indictment. And now, at the center of this quiet storm, sat Cassandra Voss, former lover of Michael Atwood, and now the woman accused of attempting to murder his pregnant wife. The people of Rockbridge had never seen anything quite like it. Their little town had known scandals: an embezzling mayor in '98, a pastor caught cheating on his taxes. But a woman accused of poisoning a pregnant socialite? That was something out of a novel, not a courtroom 45 minutes from the nearest Apple store. Cassandra's defense team arrived early, a trio of stone-faced attorneys from Chicago in crisp charcoal suits. Their client wore a conservative black dress with a high neckline, her blonde hair pinned tightly into a bun. She looked like she could have been a professor or a museum docent, calm, prepared, unflinching. But under the surface, her world was cracking. The search of her apartment had yielded damning results: a small vial of an unregulated herbal compound matching the toxins found in Lily's bloodstream. There was also Harriet's statement: how Cassandra had befriended her, asked questions about Lily's routines, and was seen near the tea pantry shortly before the incident. Cassandra's defense strategy, though, was not denial. It was redirection. Their opening argument was surgical. "This case," said lead counsel Mitchell Brenner, "is not about a scheming mistress. It is about a convenient scapegoat. A distraction. We intend to show that the prosecution's case is built on coincidence, not proof. On assumption, not fact. The jury, 7 women, 5 men, sat stoically. Most were middle-aged, locals. Some had likely donated to the very hospital fundraiser where Lily collapsed. Some had probably read the articles, seen the tabloid headlines. The judge, Honorable Nora Dandridge, made it clear from the start, this court does not try people based on rumor. The prosecution's first witness was Detective Marlowe. He methodically recounted the timeline of events, the evidence collected, and most importantly, Cassandra's movements the night of the poisoning. His demeanor was calm but resolute. The jury took notes. Next came Harriet Willis. The courtroom shifted when she stepped up. Harriet looked like someone who'd spent months carrying a weight she didn't know how to name. Her voice wavered as she spoke about her conversations with Cassandra, the compliments, the small talk, the moments that, in hindsight, had been manipulation. She said she loved Lily, Harriet said, hands twisting in her lap. She said she admired her. But then she'd ask things like, what tea Lily preferred. Whether Lily always made it herself. The defense pounced. Miss Willis, Brenner said with a smile, isn't it true that you were flattered by Ms. Voss's attention? That you considered her a friend? Harriet blinked. Yes. And you were the one who prepared the tea the morning before the incident, correct? Yes. But no further questions. The implication was clear. If Cassandra had manipulated Harriet once, perhaps she was manipulating her now. The defense didn't need to prove Cassandra was innocent. They just had to create doubt. Reasonable doubt. But that became harder when the toxicologist took the stand. Dr. Marianne Koenig presented the lab results with the precision of a metronome. The substance found in Lily's bloodstream was a rare alkaloid compound, non-lethal in small doses, but devastating for pregnant women. The same compound was found on the rim of the teacup, and in the vial discovered in Cassandra's apartment. The defense tried to argue that the compound could have come from a supplement, a natural remedy Lily took without informing her doctor. But Koenig's rebuttal was swift. The levels were too concentrated. This was not accidental ingestion. This was administered deliberately. The courtroom shifted again. The media pool scribbled furiously. Then came the most anticipated testimony of all, Michael Atwood. He walked in with a slow, deliberate pace, his shoulders squared like a man facing both a courtroom and his own guilt. He sat at the witness stand, avoiding Cassandra's gaze. He spoke about the affair. How it began. How it lingered. How he believed, naively, desperately, that he could keep the two worlds apart. I was wrong, he said simply. I was selfish. And my wife almost died because of it. The defense attempted to cast suspicion on him too. Mr. Atwood, isn't it true you stood to gain sympathy for your business by appearing as a devoted husband in the wake of tragedy? Michael bristled. My wife was fighting for her life. The only thing I wanted was for her to survive. And that was the moment. The moment the jury, and perhaps even the press, shifted back toward empathy. Toward Lily. Cassandra, for all her polish, could not stop the tide of evidence. And when the prosecution presented the security footage, grainy but clear, of her slipping into the restricted pantry area the day of the party, the silence in the room returned. Heavy. Final. The trial would continue for several more days, but the direction was set. And as the judge adjourned court for the day, Cassandra sat motionless. Her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her eyes fixed on the bench. The gravity of what was coming began to settle. The sound of the gavel still echoed in Marcus Whitmore's mind long after the courtroom had emptied. Cassandra Lane had been led away in handcuffs, her face blank, her designer heels clicking faintly against the polished floors as she vanished into the custody of the state. The courtroom's gallery had watched in silence, some with sympathy, others with judgment, but none unmoved. For Marcus, however, the ending wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. The following morning, the Whitmore mansion no longer buzzed with the hum of staff preparing for brunches or charity galas. The halls echoed with quiet, one that wasn't peaceful, but strained. Lily Whitmore lay resting in the newly converted guest room on the first floor, under 24/7 medical supervision. The room was sterile but cozy. A rocking chair by the window. Monitors softly beeping. Dr. Grace Caldwell had personally overseen the arrangement. She came every other day now, checking Lily's vitals and monitoring the baby's progress. By some miracle, Lily and her unborn daughter had survived. But survival didn't erase what had happened. Marcus spent most of his days pacing between that room and the study. The same study where he once held late-night calls with investors now bore witness to a man undone by guilt. He had turned away from the media storm, refusing interviews, ignoring calls from business associates. He hadn't been back to Whitmore Holdings' downtown office in weeks. His assistant left reports at the door. He barely touched them. The press, of course, had turned the entire ordeal into a national spectacle. Headlines flipped between sensationalism and sentiment. Heiress poisoned by mistress, the hidden double life of Marcus Whitmore. Lily's fight, how a mother and child survived the perfect betrayal. Cassandra Lane, femme fatale or framed woman? Talk shows debated Lily's fragility and strength, Marcus's morality, and whether Cassandra was a manipulative villain or a scorned lover pushed too far. Some tabloids even dared to ask if Lily bore any blame for being too trusting, too perfect. But inside the Whitmore home, there were no debates. Just the long, painful process of healing. Lily didn't speak much in the days following the verdict. Not because she was weak, but because the weight of betrayal had sapped the energy from her words. She would sit silently, her hand resting protectively over her belly, staring out the window at the once beloved rose garden where the poison had first entered her system. Marcus visited her every day. Sometimes they spoke. Other times, they didn't need to. Words had caused enough damage. What mattered now was presence, his willingness to show up, to bear witness, to sit with the consequences of what he'd allowed to grow in the shadows of their marriage. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently on the windows, Lily finally broke her silence. "I don't hate you," she said, her voice hoarse. "But I don't know how to be with you yet." Marcus nodded. "I'll wait." And he did. Therapy sessions were scheduled, individual and couples. Lily insisted on it, not as a precondition of reconciliation, but as a necessity. "If we're going to raise a daughter," she said, "she deserves two whole parents, not fractured pieces." Dr. Caldwell remained cautiously optimistic. The baby's heartbeat was steady. Lily's body was recovering, slowly but surely. But trauma didn't just live in the body. It settled in the mind. And Lily had been poisoned not only physically, but emotionally, spiritually. In a twist of fate, Harriet Morrison, Lily's assistant, the unwitting accomplice, offered her resignation. "I can't stay," she told Lily, her voice cracking. "I failed you. I should have known something was wrong." But Lily, ever more empathetic than most realized, refused the resignation. "You were used," she said. "Manipulated. Like I was. Like Marcus was." Instead of punishment, she offered Harriet structure, more oversight, clearer roles, even therapy sessions of her own. Harriet, stunned by the forgiveness, broke down in tears. She chose to stay. They moved forward, day by day. The mansion no longer hosted dignitaries or society events. Instead, it became a place of stillness. Of reading. Of prenatal yoga. Of cautious hope. And then, in early September, 2 weeks earlier than expected, Lily's contractions began. The hospital staff were ready. Security was tight. No room for error. Dr. Caldwell oversaw the entire delivery, guiding Lily through the labor with a calm, focused professionalism. Marcus never left her side, not once. He held her hand, whispered prayers, apologized 1,000 times with each contraction. Hours later, Amelia Grace Whitmore entered the world. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. A full head of dark hair. A cry that filled the room with life. For the first time in months, Lily wept, not from fear or pain, but from joy. Marcus held his daughter like she was made of glass. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. Lily, exhausted, simply smiled. The aftermath wasn't perfect. Healing wasn't linear. But it was real. Cassandra Lane remained behind bars. Her appeals were rejected. A book deal had been floated by her lawyer but quickly squashed after public outcry. She spent her days in the medical wing of the state prison under psychiatric supervision. Occasionally, letters arrived at the Whitmore residence, some from strangers offering support, others from critics unable to forgive Marcus, and even one unsigned letter that bore the scent of lavender perfume. It was never opened. Inside the nursery, Amelia's crib sat beside a rocking chair. Above her was a mobile made of stars. Beside her, always, was Lily. Every now and then, Marcus would join them. He'd sit in silence, rocking slowly, watching the miracle they'd nearly lost. And in those moments, amidst the quiet, they weren't victims or villains or headlines. They were just a family, flawed, fragile, but still standing. It was the final day of September, and the first autumn breeze swept across Willow Creek like a whisper from the past. Inside the Harrington estate, once buzzing with the sounds of gala preparations, guest chatter, and the soft rustle of silk gowns, there was only stillness. Amelia slept quietly in the nursery, her soft breathing monitored by a digital baby monitor blinking green in rhythm. Marcus sat at the edge of the dining room table, staring at a sealed envelope in front of him. It was addressed simply. To Marcus. Read only when you're ready. The handwriting was unmistakably Lily's. She had written it weeks ago, as she later told Dr. Caldwell, somewhere between her hospital discharge and the quiet, pain-filled nights recovering at home. It wasn't a goodbye letter. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a chronicle of emotion. A private confession. A final reckoning between a woman betrayed and the man she still chose to build a life with. But before we get to that letter, we need to understand what had changed. After the trial, the public frenzy faded just as quickly as it had arrived. Cassandra Morgan's sentencing, 25 years without parole, was covered on every major outlet. Her fall from socialite darling to convicted felon made for sensational headlines. But the aftermath wasn't television-worthy. It was quiet. Lingering. Marcus faced lawsuits from disgruntled business partners. Investors questioned his judgment. Several contracts were lost. He accepted it all, barely defending himself, devoting his energy instead to Lily and Amelia. That, too, was a trial, but a private one. Lily struggled to walk without discomfort for months. The poison, while not permanently damaging, had left her nerves hypersensitive. Her body healed slowly. Her heart even slower. The betrayal wasn't just Cassandra's, it was Marcus's silence, his absence, the look in his eyes she had ignored for too long. But Lily wasn't interested in revenge. She wanted understanding. Clarity. And that's why she wrote the letter. She never told Marcus about it. She left it in the antique bureau drawer, the same one where she used to hide baby socks and handwritten poems before the world tilted sideways. When Marcus finally found it, on an idle Wednesday while sorting through clutter for a charity auction, his breath caught. He didn't open it immediately. He waited 4 days. And then, one night, with Amelia asleep and Lily already tucked into bed with a heating pad against her lower back, Marcus quietly sat down and began to read. Marcus. If you're reading this, I assume one of two things happened. Either you were cleaning, finally, or your guilt finally let you sit still long enough to remember what we used to be. I don't know what to say that hasn't already been said in therapy, in passing, or in silence. I'm not writing this to shame you. I'm writing because I need you to know what it felt like. When I found out about Cassandra, it wasn't rage that hit me first. It was humiliation. Not just because you cheated, but because I knew. I had known for months. I smelled her perfume on your suit once. Heard the change in your tone when you said you were working late. I knew. And I told myself that if I just loved you harder, better, more completely, you'd come back. That's how little I thought of myself. But the worst day wasn't the day I collapsed. It was the night before. We had just finished dinner. You were laughing at something Amelia did in the ultrasound video, and I remember thinking, he's still in there. The man I married. He's still somewhere inside this polished stranger who looks like my husband. And I realized in that moment that I still loved you. Fully. Painfully. Recklessly. And that terrified me. Marcus paused, blinking hard. His fingers trembled slightly, but he kept reading. You never intended to hurt me, I know. But hurt me you did. And that's the strange thing about betrayal, it's not always malicious. Sometimes it's just weak. Human. Stupid. But it burns the same. I'm trying to forgive you. Not just for me, but for Amelia. She deserves a father who isn't swallowed by guilt. And I deserve a husband who will meet me where I am, not where he wants me to be. I won't promise to forget. I don't think I should. But I'm willing to build something new with you. Not a return to normal, because normal was never honest. But a version of us that is honest, even if it's bruised. So here's what I ask of you, stay. But stay present. Go to therapy, not because it fixes things, but because it teaches you how to feel without destroying everything in the process. Hold Amelia like she's made of starlight. Speak to me like I matter, even on days when it's hard. Especially then. We've both buried parts of ourselves in this house. Let's go dig them up. Together. Lily. Marcus didn't cry, not immediately. Instead, he sat very still, rereading the letter 3 times. When he finally stood, he went upstairs. Lily was asleep, one hand resting on her belly. Even though the baby had been born months ago, some instincts don't fade. He bent down, kissed her forehead, and whispered something inaudible. And then he walked into the nursery. He picked up Amelia, cradled her softly against his chest, and for the first time in months, perhaps years, he allowed himself to weep. Not from shame or self-pity, but from the overwhelming realization that he had been given a second chance he did not deserve. And he was going to earn it. Not with grand gestures, but with daily, deliberate, ordinary love.